Welcome to the City Management Report. My name is Luke Bonner. I am the Senior Economic Development Advisor for the City of Sterling Heights. I'm joined by Mark Vanderpool, City Manager for the City of Sterling Heights, and Melanie Davis, President of the Sterling Heights Regional Chamber. Thank you for being on the show today.
Glad to be here.
And thank you for having me on the show today. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're here.
Today we're going to talk about one of the most important and vital corridors, not only in Sterling Heights, but all of Macomb County, and that's M59. Hall Road, also known as the Golden Corridor, which it's been referred to for years and years and years. The Golden Corridor means a couple of things. It means a lot for business, and it means a lot for government for a variety of reasons. Melanie, why don't we start with you? Talk about the Golden Corridor in terms of the Chamber and your members and what that area really means to business.
Well, there's so much business that's transacted down that corridor, and I know that there's some disagreement about when it started being called the Golden Corridor, but I think I first heard that term all the way back in like 2006. So it's been a while, and they call it the Golden Corridor because of the billions of dollars that the retail that goes through there every day, retail, restaurants, and I think it's really important to the business community because it gives them an opportunity to, the residents, it gives them an opportunity to go and visit all those establishments, and it adds investment to the community that goes back into the community, so the dollars that stay in our community are very important.
From the city's perspective, Mark, we operate on tax base, obviously with construction, property taxes, et cetera. So what has that area meant to the city over time?
Well, Luke, just by way of history, just to add on the first question, some may remember that the Golden Corridor in the old days in Sterling Heights was kind of referred to as the Van Dyke Corridor. And now that's kind of morphed and shifted and now run down the M59 corridor, the Van Dyke Corridor now, because of all the manufacturing, commercial, and high-tech uses there, from defense to aerospace and all the robotics now that are in the auto assembly plants on Van Dyke. Now that's referred to as the Sterling Innovation District. And so the Golden Corridor now has taken on a much larger region, if you will. It's really marketed heavily by the Detroit Regional Convention and Visitors Bureau as a Golden Corridor for all the reasons that Melanie mentioned. But these corridors are so important to a city like Sterling Heights because, as Melanie said, it represents millions of dollars, hundreds of millions. So when you look at the entire corridor from Utica down to 94, well over $1 billion in just corporate investments, not to mention the economic impact and the tens of thousands of vehicles that drive down M59 every day, close to 100,000 vehicles every single day. So it's so important that cities take a leading role in these major corridors. There's not another one like it in the state. So we realize that with the state coming through and doing a massive road project, over $50 million, that was the time to establish a new vision for the corridor and really brand it as such. We owe it to the businesses that invest in these corridors heavily. We owe it to visitors that come through the corridor and our residents. We want to make sure that the corridors remain vibrant, that there's ample jobs and continued investment. And not that branding alone is going to do it, but it's certainly going to help.
But you bring up a good point. You know, historically, Detroit suburbs were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So generally speaking, they all kind of look the same, right? From an architectural standpoint and a land planning standpoint, they look the same. One of the projects that's come up that you've talked about with the M59 corridor is that branding initiative. And something that the city has done to really kind of stick out from the crowd is establishing the Golden Ring branding from both an public artwork feature, but also some demarcation lines of where you're entering and when you're leaving the Golden Corridor. So back to Melanie, for those kinds of initiatives from the public side, how are they received from businesses, and does it make the differences that we hope for?
I think so. I think it does. I think just from a placemaking standpoint, and placemaking impacts residents, but it also impacts businesses because it attracts people. It's communities where people want to live and work and play. And when you add those residents, what are residents? Residents are customers. So that's good for the business community as well. And I think sometimes when we look at things like public art or investing in branding, it's not, sometimes the absence of that speaks louder than having something. And what I always say is, I think we as a community here in Sterling Heights specifically, we understand, residents and businesses, that we've all seen communities that don't reinvest in things like this. They don't reinvest in public art or invest in parks and recreation and placemaking things. And I think there's no disagreement among anybody that we don't want to be one of those communities. I think that what we've done here in Sterling Heights, even in the past 10 years, has been just amazing in terms of the placemaking that we've included, the Parks and Rec millage that allowed us to do everything that we did. The city did in Farmers Market or at Dodge Park with the Farmers Market, the new pavilion, and now a lot of the branding initiative that's going down along M59. All of those things make Sterling Heights an attractive place for residents. And there's, like I said, sometimes the absence of that speaks louder than having something there. And I think that the people really appreciate the fact that we are continuing to reinvest in the city and make sure that it stays a vibrant place for residents and businesses alike for years to come. So I think it is well received by businesses because, like I said, when you attract families and you attract residents, those are all customers, potential customers for the business community. So I think they really reap the rewards of that.
Mark, you have, I would say, been quite the thought leader in the placemaking arena as far as communities goes, especially with a lot of work that you've been doing with the Michigan Municipal League over the years, which has put an emphasis on placemaking in communities. What has the strategy been like for the city in terms of placemaking investments? Where did it start? Where do you kind of see ourselves in the middle of, and where ultimately do you think we're going to finish up in terms of all of our placemaking investments?
That's a very good question, Luke. Placemaking is so important in cities across the country, and those that do it well are the communities that are really prospering. And I think Sterling Heights, thanks to really good leadership from our mayor and city council and other stakeholders, Sterling Heights is now on the leading edge of placemaking. But it all really started a number of years ago. We went through the Great Recession, and that was a horrible period of time. We had to cut about $30 million out of our general operations. We had to re-engineer the organization. We privatized some of our services. We regionalized some of our services. And it took us about 5 to 6 years to get through that self-imposed emergency plan, if you will. But we made it. We got through it, and we're now financially stable. But we realized a few years ago that we had really somewhat neglected the community. We were so focused on surviving the Great Recession, making sure we were financially stable, that we weren't reinvesting in the city. So we decided at that time to go through a Visioning 2030 process to establish the vision for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that process was very engaging. We had residents involved in it, we had businesses involved in it through focus groups and surveys and so on. And what the community came up collectively with our Visioning 2030 plan was a vision statement and 7 guiding principles. And 3 of those guiding principles relate to what we're doing on these corridors. And I'll just read them because I think they're important. We have to have focal points that are both public and private to serve as destinations for residents and businesses. You mentioned it earlier. Sometimes when you go through these suburban communities, especially major corridors, it's a pretty bland experience. You don't know when you go from one community to the next. You're just zipping through them. And this guiding principle attempts to change that. Another one is we need well-maintained and aesthetically pleasing roads and green spaces. In the past, when we had a road improvement project, all we did was address the pavement. There was no attention to what is the experience when you drive down that corridor. What's the landscaping look like? What's the signage look like? What's the lighting look like? Is it inviting? Does it create a positive experience? This guiding principle attempts to change that. And then also related to this effort that we're talking about today is we need to have successful, vibrant, and attractive commercial centers with unique offerings. And what we're doing on M59, what we did on Van Dyke, what we did on Dodge Park Road, all relate to that. You know, we want to make sure our commercial centers are vibrant. And if we don't lead the way by investing in public property, how can we expect businesses to do that? So that's kind of how this all started. I think the Visioning 2030 plan has been just an amazing success story. We're not through it. It'll take us many years to continue to get through the Visioning 2030 plan, and ultimately it'll have to be updated for the next 20, 30 years, but it's working.
Right. And I've always believed quality public investment stimulates quality private investment, as we're setting the standard and the expectation that hopefully private sector will follow.
Yeah, and if I could just comment on
Sure,
that, if
yeah.
you don't mind me interrupting. You know, when you think about the incredible places that we've gone through, you know, on vacations, anyone, you could ask this question of anyone. Think of your best vacations. What do you remember about them? What was it like driving through certain places? What did you have a positive experience or not? And in almost all cases, there's a direct correlation to well-maintained private property and well-maintained public property. When you go to other places, you take note of that. You know, whether you're in Florida or California or, you know, anywhere across the country, and you think of these really good places you've been to, or even, you know, internationally. And the same is true for the opposite. When you think of undesirable places, and there's unfortunately many examples in Michigan, there's many examples nationwide. When you drive through some of those areas, you have an image of blighted public property and blighted private property. So there is a direct correlation. Obviously, we want to avoid the latter. We want to have a very positive experience, and there is a direct correlation between well-maintained public property and private property.
Right. So getting back to the Golden Corridor, Mark, the city's perspective on the investment it made on the Golden Ring, branding and public artwork. We talked about placemaking, we talked about the importance of that for business. From a community aspect, what was the thought process behind establishing the Golden Corridor signage and public artwork, and what is the hope that we have that will accomplish?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the brand has already been established to a great extent. The Golden Corridor brand, it's already marketed as such by outsiders. There's many visitors, including visitors from Canada, that come down and shop in that corridor. So the brand was done. We had to think about, you know, how do you exemplify the brand? How do you take it to another level? And certainly, you know, we had experts help us through that process, architects and engineering experts and others. So essentially, it's done through landscaping. If you look at when you come into Sterling Heights, there's now welcome signage. There was never any welcome signage on M59. You never knew when you were arriving into Sterling Heights or, you know, getting into Macomb Township or Shelby and so on. Now you know. When you come over the M53 bridge and you're eastbound, you see the Welcome to Sterling Heights sign. You really can't miss it. And underneath it is this slogan, the Golden Corridor. And then there's a smaller round golden ring, if you will. And then you come upon the larger iconic signage, the Golden Ring. And that, you know, then sets the stage for this, you know, much bigger signage. So what the iconic signage represents, it really is an ancient moon gate symbol, which represents a portal into prosperity. And that's what the Golden Corridor represents. As you go from one community to the next, you know, you're driving through a corridor that's really prosperous. And that's what this iconic signage is supposed to do. Now, interestingly, when you think about the ancient moon gate symbol, most people have never heard of it and haven't given it much thought, but it's the most widely used iconic signage in the nation and perhaps the world. If you were to Google it, you would see these images all over, including right here in Detroit. So that's what's behind the icon, and the icon can change over time. Well, first of all, the colors of the icon can change. It doesn't have to be golden all the time. It can be lit green for St. Patrick's Day. It can be lit various colors, patriotic colors for the 4th of July, and of course other colors for the holidays and so on. So it can morph into a little different symbolism as well. But that's what's behind it. And the idea is that the Golden Corridor, in some form of this iconic signage, continues on down the corridor all the way to 94. Some communities don't have the funding right now to do it, so we'll see. It may take some time to play out. But someone had to go first. And it only made sense that Sterling Heights went first because of the $55 million that MDOT was investing in the road. You really only get one shot at it when you have a massive road improvement project like that. And with economies of scale and so on, it makes sense to make signage and landscaping improvements at that time.
So the predominant industry on M59 is retail. And retail historically has been a very flashy industry. Even if you go to their trade shows, the biggest retail trade shows in Las Vegas, and the trade show floor is full of flash and dash. So making that kind of flashy investment, I think, is representative of retail, of which that corridor is. Melanie, question for you. With this branding that we are doing, and I want to sort of flow into Lakeside Shopping Center, a longtime staple in the community, longtime staple in Macomb County. We know that there's been a lot of changes going on at Lakeside, different ownership, now in receivership, with an opportunity potentially to breathe new life into Lakeside, depending on who the new owner is. What does this kind of initiative, in your opinion, mean to overall efforts for a Lakeside Shopping Center long-term for its vibrancy, and how do the two go together, in your opinion?
Well, I think when you talk about branding, it's everything, right? It's not just the golden ring. It's not just the signage that we've put in. It's all of it, and it's representative of the destination, if you will, that is the Golden Corridor. So when we talk about, what I love about the branding effort is that it's taking all of those millions of dollars that go up and down that corridor every day in terms of restaurants and retail, and you're right, it is predominantly retail, and it allows us to really make a statement about what this corridor is and what it means, not just locally. I mean, because I think the people that live here know what it is because they shop it and they eat there every day, or work along the corridor every day. But when you're talking about economic development, you're talking about attracting a large investment from a big restaurant that wants to come in, or you're looking at something like as big as Lakeside Mall, and you're looking at what will that look like in 5 years? How can we reimagine that? I think that when you're looking at it from an economic development perspective and you're looking at developers coming in, it gives us a way to very clearly and succinctly tell them what this corridor is and what it means and why they would want to be here. So I think I think that's what the branding, this initiative does for us, is it's really putting that name on it. We've all, in the area have talked about it as the Golden Corridor for years, but it's really about putting that stamp on it now in a big, meaningful way and allowing us to talk about the Golden Corridor as a destination and as a place that large developers would want to be.
And you're right, we've talked about it a ton. It's the first time I feel like it's been in writing so that everyone can see it. Now that it's established that way, do you think that businesses will take advantage of the fact that it's now a clearly written brand that people can see as they're traversing the corridor? Do you think businesses will take advantage of that in terms of now identifying their location and their business in the Golden Corridor? Do you see it evolving to that, and do you potentially see it evolving to the standpoint of they're actually using it on any of their own marketing material or letterhead or anything like that?
I hope so. I mean, that would be the idea, right, is to get them to do that, and I think smart businesses will take advantage of this opportunity to do exactly that. And I'm really hoping too, like I said, from an economic development perspective, that this gives us a way to really put that stamp on this corridor and explain to other businesses why this is the place that they would want to be.
Well, and if I could just add to that, Luke, as you well know, because you're so involved in working with property owners and developers across the community, we know right now that businesses in the area of the Golden Corridor are marketing their property for sale. You know, when property does turn over, and it happens, when you look at the advertisements now, some are saying located in the Golden Corridor. So interestingly, it's already happening, which is really awesome. And the same is true for homes that are being marketed for sale. Often realtors will say near the Dodge Park amenities, or near the Freedom Trail bike hike path. You know, so it's already being used in many ways, and that's an example of property being more valuable near parks and green spaces, and in this case, a well-maintained, attractive, and a focal point corridor.
Final thoughts on the Golden Corridor. Melanie, I'll start with you. What do you think the future is short term over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think are some major things that could happen within that Golden Corridor? What would you like to see, and maybe what are some things that are already maybe in the hopper?
Well, I think going back to your point about will people start to use this, I really do hope that that is the case. And the more that we continue to perpetuate that brand through the community, I think the stronger it will become. And you know, the thing is with any brand, you can't just, you know, what I really like about this is that we didn't come out and say, we're going to brand this the Golden Corridor because this is what we want to be. We came out and said, we're going to brand this as the Golden Corridor because this is what we are. And as long as you're walking the talk, and you can, the numbers and the data all back that up, I think that's really important. So I hope that this helps us from an economic development perspective. And one of the things that I would really like to see is just, you know, using this brand to help reimagine Lakeside Mall and to figure out what we want that to be moving forward. I mean, we've seen some of the concepts, and we would love to see that become a super vibrant place for people to live, work, and play.
In this case of the Golden Corridor, there's no dispute that it's ultimately going to pay dividends. It's already paying dividends. We've already received a great deal of attention with the branding effort. And if you think of Van Dyke, for example, we went through a similar process with Van Dyke. If you remember the Van Dyke corridor, it was a pretty bland corridor. It was very tired. When you drove through Sterling Heights, you had no idea you were really in Sterling Heights. There was no really positive experience with that corridor. But you may recall when that road was improved, the state, county, and the city all had a financial role in improving that roadway. There was significant upgrades to the aesthetic elements of Van Dyke. New lighting, new landscaping, new crosswalks, new decorative traffic signals, monument markers, iconic signage, if you will, similar to what we're talking about on M59. And think of the experience now when you drive down Van Dyke. It not only is aesthetically pleasing, you know, it's a positive experience, but the reinvestment in that corridor is unbelievable. I mean, we have 7 hotels that have either just opened in the last couple of years or are currently under construction or on the drawing board, just in that Van Dyke corridor. Not to mention the couple $1 billion investment that FCA has made in that corridor, and the economic impact of all the other businesses with that result from these investments and the synergy that's created. Now, was it just the Van Dyke project? Of course not. But did it help? Of course it did. And so the same thing is expected up on M59. There's tangible proof right here in Sterling Heights that these efforts work. So why wouldn't we continue them, of course? And with respect to Lakeside, Lakeside has been an economic engine for the community since, the mid-1970s when it opened. And Lakeside is obviously going through an evolutionary process now. And the future for Lakeside is super exciting. The master planning that we've gone through the last few years is really exciting. We've been working hand in hand with the current owner. The property's going through a really fascinating mixed-use rezoning. Now we're sowing the seeds as we speak for what will surely be a very prosperous lakeside redevelopment effort over the ensuing years, positioning Lakeside for continued success for decades to come. But that's, again, it goes back to, we can't expect private property to do that alone if we're not willing to make investments on public property as well, leading the way. So I'm really super excited about what's going on M59. I know the mayor and our city council share that excitement. I know the businesses share the excitement. We've heard from Melanie, who represents, well over 1,000 business members through the chamber. They're excited about it. Certainly you're going to get some that may question it, and that's a good thing. But the overwhelming support, I think, is going to be significant, and this is going to will continue to be a very successful corridor, not only for Sterling Heights, but all the communities along the Golden Corridor.
Mark and I were recently at the International Council of Shopping Centers continuing education program in Novi about 3 weeks ago, and we were panelists talking about the evolution and redevelopment of enclosed shopping centers. And the audience was retailers, retail developers, and service providers that are in that retail space. And from what I could tell, all of the feedback was buzzing over the Golden Corridor, the things that were being done there, and also our approach to Lakeside, really capitalizing on more mixed use, high density for something that is, I think, desperately needed along that corridor as well. So between business and government, we have been working hand in hand, and we're seeing some tremendous benefits from that, and I think it'll continue. So thank you both for being on the show, and we appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you for joining the City Management Report. Thank you.
Thank you.